Welcome to our Mastermind Alliance webinar. If you don't catch it live, you can always go on YouTube, type in Create Wealth While Growing Younger Part 1, or here is the URL. You can write that down and type it all in. We're going to be talking about the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. The IBSN number is 978-0-449-21492-3 if you want to follow along. Our first chapter is going to be Thoughts or Things. Before we start, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the gentleman who's going to be presenting the webinar. His name is Richard S. Williams, and this is his picture. He was the National NSP, Nature Sunshine Project National Manager for 20 years, past president of National Managers Association. He was recipient of a Lifetime Achievement Award for Nature Sunshine. He also is a board member of IPA, which stands for International Iridology Practitioners Association, and he's a founding member of American College of Iridology. So he's quite accomplished. This is Dick getting his Lifetime Achievement Award. I wasn't there, so Dick, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I sure can. Every time I look at this, I get a great feeling. It was a special day. It was the culmination of 30-some years with the company. I so excitedly joined the company in 1980, 81 perhaps, and it's been a wonderful ride. In that picture, you'll see one of our great associates, Dr. Claiborne Holzman, who has a wonderful practice in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. And to my left, my wife, Joy. It was an exciting time. And I think it'd be a good idea to go forward to this next slide that shows us about what we're going to be discussing today. The various portions of this chapter, as you can see, 1 through 10, deal with the inventor and the tramp. And I don't think I'll read these others to you. I know you can read, but I would like to point out that previously, and hopefully you've listened to this, we recorded the publisher's preface and a word from the author prior to Napoleon Hill, in other words. And prior to going to here, he mentions time and time again that in every chapter, virtually every page, the secret that guarantees success, that he pursued for 20 years in interviewing the great minds of the country, the most successful people throughout the world, actually, and that they all had discovered this secret. And he feels it's best that each of us discover this secret within these pages as we read through and discover it again. So as I start this, I would like to just go to the first page now that mentions the man who thought his way into partnership with Thomas Edison. His name was Edwin C. Barnes. And at the time that this picture was taken, he was little more than a tramp, literally penniless. However, he had a goal in mind, and he put the secret, which he possessed already. He was fortunate in that he had acknowledged that and learned it, because he worked that formula and in time, indeed, became a partner with Thomas Edison. An amazing transformation. So this chapter starts out with the man who thought his way into partnership with Thomas Edison. And Napoleon Hill writes, truly, thoughts are things. And I would like to say I have discovered that the home that I live in now is an outpicturing, a receipt, if you will, of an idea that my wife and I have. And we just love it. We absolutely manufactured it with a thought. So thoughts are things, and powerful things at that. according to Napoleon Hill. And he said further that when they're mixed with definite purpose, persistence, and a burning desire for their translation into riches or other material objects, they happen. They always happen. Some years ago, Edward C. Barnes discovered how true it is that men really do think and grow rich. His discovery did not come about at one sitting. However, it came little by little. It began with a burning desire to become a business associate of the great Edison. One of the chief characteristics of Barnes' desire was that it was definite. I've underlined that word. It was definite. It was specific. So many times when I interview people, sometimes for employment, whatever the purposes that might be, I ask them what their goal is, and they don't have one. They're waiting for life to happen to them. People that succeed happen to life. So Mr. Barnes wanted to work with Edison, not for him, with him. And he points out that we should observe carefully the description of how he went about translating his desire into reality. And he further states that you'll have a better understanding of the principles which lead to riches when you do so. So when this desire or impulse of thought first flashed into his mind, he was in no position to act upon it. Two difficulties stood in his way. He did not know Mr. Edison, and he did not have enough money to pay his railroad fare to Orange, New Jersey. These difficulties were sufficient to have discouraged a majority of people, but he made the attempt to carry it out despite this, because this was no ordinary desire. The next heading, and actually page 1 of this book, is the inventor and the tramp who presented himself to Mr. Edison's library and announced that he had come to do business with the inventor. In speaking of the first meeting between Barnes and Edison, years later, Mr. Edison said, "He stood there before me looking like an ordinary tramp, but there was something in the expression of his face which conveyed the impression that he was determined to get what he had come after. I had learned from years of experience with men and women that when a man really desires a thing so deeply that he is willing to stake his entire future on a single turn of the wheel in order to get it, he is sure to win. In other words, they'll accept no other option. I gave him the opportunity he asked for because I saw he had made up his mind to stand by it until it succeeded. Subsequent events proved that no mistake was made. It could not have been the young man's appearance which got him his start in Edison's office, for that was definitely against him. It's what he had thought that really counted. Barnes did not get his partnership with Edison on his first interview. He did get a chance to work in the Edison offices at a very nominal wage. Months went by. Apparently nothing happened to bring nearer this goal, this coveted goal, which Barnes had set up in his mind as his definite major purpose. But something important was happening in Barnes' mind. He was constantly intensifying his desire to become the business associate of Edison. Psychologists have correctly said that when one is truly ready for a thing, it puts in its appearance. As a former martial artist, I remember first hearing that when the student was ready, the master would appear. That just came to mind. I thought I would point it out. Barnes was ready for a business association with Edison. Moreover, he was determined to remain ready until he got that which he was seeking. He did not say to himself, "Oh, well, what's the use? I guess I'll change my mind and try for a salesman's job." But he did say, "I came here to go into business with Edison, and I will accomplish this end if it takes the remainder of my life." He meant it. What a different story men would have to tell if only they would adopt a definite purpose and stand by that purpose until it had time to become an all-consuming obsession. Maybe young Barnes did not know it at the time, but his bulldog determination, his persistence in standing back of a single desire was destined to mow down all opposition and bring him the opportunity that he was seeking. So Napoleon Hill at this point goes on to say and speak of the sly disguises of opportunity. Quite often in my life, I've noticed sometimes they appear as a disaster, but in effect, sometimes rudely, sometimes I don't know what other adjectives we use, but they don't seem like such a good idea at the time. But as Napoleon Hill says, sometimes they're really sly and very inappropriate, apparently, and they turn out later not to be so appropriate, or to be appropriate, pardon me. So when the opportunity came, it appeared in a different form and from a different direction than Barnes had expected. That is one of the tricks of opportunity. It has a sly habit of slipping in by the back door subtly, and often it comes disguised in the form of misfortune, temporary defeat. Perhaps this is why so many fail to recognize opportunity. Mr. Edison had just perfected a new office device known at the time as the Edison dictating machine. His salesmen were not enthusiastic over the machine. They did not believe that it could be sold without great effort. But Barnes saw his opportunity. It had crawled in quietly, hidden in the queer-looking machine, which interested no one but Barnes and the inventor. Barnes knew he could sell the Edison dictating machine. He suggested this to Edison and promptly got his chance. He did sell the machine. In fact, he sold it so successfully that Edison gave him a contract to distribute and market it all over the nation. Out of this business association, Barnes made himself rich in money, but he did something infinitely greater. He proved that one really may think their way into riches. How much actual cash that original desire of Barnes was worth to him, we have no way of knowing. Perhaps it bought him $2 or $3 million, but the amount, whatever it is, becomes insignificant when it is compared with the greater asset he acquired in the form of definite knowledge that an intangible impulse of thought can be transmuted into material rewards by the application of known principles. Barnes literally thought himself into a partnership with the great Edison. He thought himself into a fortune. He had nothing to start with except the capacity to know what he wanted and the determination to stand by that desire until he had realized it. In the next segment of Think and Grow Rich, we have the heading 3 Feet from Gold. This is a lesson that virtually everybody has to learn at some point if they're going to be successful. And Napoleon Hill goes on to say that one of the most common causes of failure is the habit of quitting when one is overtaken by temporary defeat. I've noticed in life a lot of people quit while they're successful. I've seen several instances of that. People just couldn't handle success, and they would do something to sabotage themselves. Napoleon Hill says that every person is guilty of this mistake at one time or another. An article by R.U. Darby was caught by the gold fever or an uncle, excuse me, I'm misreading. An uncle of R.U. Darby was caught by the gold fever in the gold rush days, and he went west to dig and grow rich. He had never heard that more gold has been mined from the thoughts of men that has ever been taken from the earth. He staked a claim and went to work with pick and shovel. And after weeks of labor, he was rewarded by the discovery of the shining ore. He needed machinery to bring the ore to the surface. Quietly, he covered up the mine, retraced his footsteps to his home in Williamsburg, Maryland. He told his relatives and a few neighbors of the strike. They got together money for the needed machinery and they had it shipped. The uncle and Darby went back to the mine. The first car of ore was mined and shipped to the smelter. The returns proved that they had one of the richest mines in Colorado. A few more cars of that ore would clear all the debts. Then would come the big killing and profits. Down went the drills, up went the hopes of Darby and Uncle. Then something happened. The vein of gold, ore, disappeared. They had come to the end of the rainbow, and the pot of gold was no longer there. They drilled on desperately, trying to pick up the vein again, all to no avail. Finally, reluctantly, they decided to quit. They sold the machinery to a junk man for a few $100s, and they took the train back home. The junk man called in a mining engineer to look at the mine and do a little calculating. The engineer advised that the project had failed because the owners were not familiar with fault lines. His calculations showed that the vein would be found just 3 feet from where the Darbys had stopped drilling. And that's exactly where it was found. The junk man took millions of dollars in ore from the mine because he knew enough to seek expert counseling before giving up. And now we'll, in a sub part of the chapter 1, we have another category. Those of you that are following on the book, that's page 4, bottom of page 4. And the headline is, I will never stop because men say no. Long after Mr. Darby recouped his loss many times over, when he made the discovery that desire can be transmuted into gold, the discovery came after he went into the business of selling life insurance. That's something I can relate to. I sold life insurance, almost one of my first jobs. It served me later once I no longer was selling it. At least I knew something about it and was able to use it for myself and my family. So remembering that he lost a huge fortune because he stopped 3 feet from gold, Darby profited by the experience in his chosen work by the simple method of saying to himself, I stopped 3 feet from gold, but I never stop because men say no. When I ask them to buy insurance, that reminds me of my own experience when I was selling cemetery property, vaults, markers, land, for about 25 years. I would close 15, sometimes 20 times. A close one time would be to tell a narrative pointing out the difficulty that a widow or widower would have all of a sudden faced with spending the insurance money, or would have preferred to spend the money that they were now spending on a funeral by themselves, as opposed to doing this ahead of time, so that they'll simply put a plan of action into place. That would be one close. And I would not be unusual to have to go there 20 times in order to get the sale. That's called persistence. So Darby became one of a small group of men who sell over $1 million of life insurance annually. Well, I did do that. He owed his stickability, if you will, to the lesson he learned from his quitability in the gold mining business. That's spelled Quitability. Before success comes in any man's life, he is sure to meet with much temporary defeat and perhaps some failure. When defeat overtakes a man, the easiest and most logical thing to do is to quit. And that's exactly what the majority of men do. More than 500 of the most successful men this country have ever known told the author their great success came just one step beyond the point at which defeat had overtaken them. Failure is a trickster with a keen sense of irony and cunning. It takes great delight in tripping one whose success is almost within reach. That's a very, very important segment of chapter 1. Then we go on with another heading, a 50-cent lesson in persistence. I love this story. Shortly after Mr. Darby receives his degree from the University of Hard Knocks and had decided to profit by his experience in the gold mining business, he had the good fortune to be present on an occasion that provided to him that no does not necessarily mean no. One afternoon, he was helping his uncle grind wheat in an old-fashioned mill. The uncle operated a large farm in which a number of colored sharecrop farmers lived. We now use the word Afro-American or black. Colored goes back to his days in the 30s. I've never been comfortable with any of those descriptions. I like Americans. I guess that's just me. Quietly, the door was opened and a small colored child, the daughter of a tenant, walked in and took her place near the door. The uncle looked up, saw the child, and barked at her roughly, "What do you want?" Meekly, the child replied, "My mammy say send her 50 cents. The uncle retorted, "I'll not do it. Now you run on home." "Yassa," the child replied, but she did not move. The uncle went ahead with his work, so busily engaged that he didn't pay attention to the child to observe that she did not leave. When he looked up and saw her still standing there, he yelled at her, "I told you to go on home. Now go, or I'll take a switch to you." The little girl said, "Yassa," but she did not budge. The uncle dropped a sack of grain he was about to pour into the mill hopper, picked up a barrel stave, and started towards the child with an expression on his face that indicated trouble. Darby held his breath. He was certain he was about to witness an assault. He knew his uncle had a fierce temper. When the uncle reached the spot where the child was standing, she quickly stepped forward one step, looked up into his eyes, and screamed at the top of her shrill voice, "My mammy gotta have 50 cents. The uncle stopped, looked at her for a minute, then slowly laid the barrel stave on the floor, put his hand in his pocket, took out $50 and gave it to her. The child took the money and slowly backed towards the door, never taking her eyes off the man who she had just conquered. After she had gone, the uncle sat down on the box, looked out the window into a space for more than 10 minutes. He was pondering with awe over the whipping he had just taken. Mr. Darby, too, was doing some thinking. That was the first time in all his experience that he had seen a colored child deliberately master an adult white person. How did she do? What happened to his uncle that caused him to lose his fierceness and become as docile as a lamb? What strange power did this child use that enabled her to master the uncle in this situation? These and other similar questions flashed into Darby's mind, but he did not find the answer until years later when he told me the story. Strangely, the story of this unusual experience was told to the author in the old mill on the very spot where the uncle took his whipping. Fascinating. In the next, on page 7, we have under Thoughts of Things, the strange power of a child. So Darby goes on to say, as we stood there in that musty old mill, Mr. Darby repeated the story of the unusual conquest and finished by asking, what can you make of it? What strange power did this child use that so completely whipped my uncle? The answer to his question will be found in the principles described in this book. The answer is full and complete. It contains details, instructions that are sufficient to enable anyone to understand and apply the same force which the little child accidentally stumbled upon. Keep your mind alert, and you will observe exactly what strange power came to the rescue of this child. You will catch a glimpse of this power in the next chapter. Somewhere in the book, you will find an idea that will quicken your receptive powers and place at your command for your own benefit this same irresistible power. The awareness of this power may come to you in the first chapter, or it may flash into your mind in some subsequent chapter. It may come in the form of a single idea, or it may come in the nature of a plan or a purpose. Again, it may cause you to go back into your past experiences of failure or defeat and bring to the surface again some lesson by which you can regain all that you have lost through the defeat. After I had described to Mr. Darby the power of unwittingly used by this little colored child, he quickly retraced his 30 years of experience as a life insurance salesman and frankly acknowledged that his success in that field was due in no small degree to the lessons that he'd learned from the child. Mr. Darby pointed out, every time a prospect tried to bow me out without buying, I saw that child standing there in the old mill, her big eyes glaring in defiance. And I said to myself, I've got to make this sale. The better portion of all sales I have made were made after people had said no. That's certainly been my experience. So he replaced his mistake in having stopped only 3 feet from the gold. But he said that experience was a blessing in disguise. It taught me how to keeping on. No matter how hard the going may be, a lesson I needed to learn before I could succeed at anything. So to continue this story with Mr. Darby and his uncle, I'll simply read what Napoleon Hill has written. This story of Mr. Darby and his uncle, the child and the gold mine, doubtless will be read by hundreds of men, probably thousands, who make their living by selling life insurance. And to all of these, the author wishes to offer the suggestion that Darby owes to these two experiences: his ability to sell more than $1 million of life insurance every year. Mr. Darby's experiences were commonplace and simple enough, yet they held the answer to his destiny in life, and therefore they were as important to him as life itself. He profited by these two dramatic experiences because he analyzed them and he found the lessons they taught. But what of the man who has neither the time nor the inclination to study failure in search of knowledge that will lead to success? Where and how is he to learn the art of converting defeat into stepping stones of opportunity? In an answer to these questions, this book was written. what I've found in my own personal life is if you don't quit, you'll find the answer eventually. Anybody can quit. So if you want to make it, just don't quit. So now we have another segment of chapter 1, headed by these words: one sound idea is all that you need. The answer called for a description of 13 principles, but remember, as you read, the answer you may be seeking to the questions which have caused you to ponder over the strangeness of life may be found in your own mind through some idea, plan, or purpose which may spring into your mind as you read. One sound idea is all that one needs to achieve success. The principles described in this book contain ways and means of creating useful ideas. Before we go any further in our approach to this description of these principles, we believe you are entitled to receive this important suggestion. When riches begin to come, they come so quickly, in such great abundance, that one wonders where they have been hiding during all those lean years that we all know about. This is an astounding statement, and all the more so when we take into consideration the popular belief that riches come only to those who work hard and long. When you begin to think and grow rich, you will observe that riches begin with a state of mind, with definiteness of purpose, with little or no hard work. You and every other person ought to be interested in knowing how to acquire that state of mind, which will attract riches. I spent 25 years in research because I too wanted to know how wealthy men became that way. In my particular case, I've made millions with Nature Sunshine products over the years, some 40 years now. I got to say that it happened because I had a plan and I didn't deviate from it. So moving forward, Napoleon Hill writes, observe very closely as soon as you master the principles of this philosophy and begin to follow the instructions for applying these principles. Your financial status will begin to improve, and everything you touch will begin to transmute itself into an assist for your benefit. Impossible? No, not at all. One of the main weaknesses of mankind is the average man's familiarity with the word impossible. He knows all the rules which will not work. He knows all the things which cannot be done. This book was written for those who seek the rules which have made others successful and are willing to stake everything on those rules. Success comes to those who become success conscious. You're looking at it another way, but this is stated so well. Success comes to those who become success conscious. Failure comes to those who indifferently allow themselves to become failure conscious. The object of this book is to help all who will seek it to learn the art of changing their minds from failure consciousness to success consciousness. Another weakness found in altogether too many people is the habit of measuring everything and everyone by their own impressions and beliefs. That another weakness found in altogether too many people is the habit of measuring everything and everyone by their own impressions and beliefs. Some persons who will read this will believe that they cannot think and grow rich because their thought habits have become steeped in poverty, want, misery, failure, defeat. I personally also find that some people have been taught that money is evil somehow. No, the misuse of it could be evil, but think of all the good that you could do with extra money, like help your church, like feed the poor, like build meaningful educational centers, pursue ideas that are positive and will manifest. One of my favorite thoughts is I never got a job from a poor man. Money, riches are very, very important. Without them, without adequate money, you just cannot live a successful life. So these unfortunate people remind me of a prominent Chinese who came to America to be educated in American ways. He attended the University of Chicago, and one day President Harper met this young Oriental on the campus, stopped to chat with him for a few minutes, and asked what had impressed him as being the most noticeable characteristic of the American people. Why, the student exclaimed, "The queer slant of your eyes are off slant." So what do we say about the Chinese? We refuse to believe that which we do not understand. We foolishly believe that our own limitations are the proper measure of limitations. Sure, the other fellow's eyes are off slant because they're not the same as our own. This gets us to the impossible Ford V8 motor. We learned that when Henry Ford decided to produce his famous V8 motor, he chose to build an engine with an entire 8 cylinders cast in one block, and instructed his engineers to produce a design for that engine. The engine was placed on paper, but the engineers agreed to a man that it was impossible, simply impossible, to cast an 8-cylinder engine block in one piece. Ford said, "Produce it anyway." But they said, "It's impossible." "Go ahead," Ford commanded, "and stay on the job until you succeeded, no matter how much time is required." The engineers went ahead. There was nothing else for them to do if they were to remain on Ford's staff. 6 months went by and nothing happened. Another 6 months passed and still nothing happened. The engineers tried every conceivable plan to carry out the orders, but the thing seemed out of question, simply impossible. At the end of the year, Ford said, "Go right ahead. I want it and I'll have it." They went ahead, and then, as if by a stroke of magic, the secret was discovered. The Ford determination had one more time, once. This story may not be described with minute accuracy, but the sum and substance of it is correct. Deduce from it, you who wish to think and grow rich, the secret of the Ford millions. If you can, you'll not have to look very far. Henry Ford was a success because he understood and applied the principles of success. One of these is desire, knowing what one wants. Remember this Ford story as you read and pick out the lines in which the secret of his stupendous achievement had been described. If you can do this, if you can lay your finger on the particular group of principles which made Henry Ford rich, you can equal his achievements in almost any calling for which you're suited. Our next major heading is why you are the master of your fate. You're basically a reflection of what you do. So, as you see, the author, Napoleon Hill, says further, when Henley wrote the prophetic lines, I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul, he should have informed us that we are the masters of our fate, the captain of our souls, because we have the power to control our thoughts. He should have told us that our brains became magnetized with dominating thoughts, which we hold in our minds, and by means which no man is familiar, these magnets attract us to the forces, the people, the circumstances of life, which harmonize with the nature of our dominating thoughts. He should have told us that our brains become magnetized with dominating thoughts, which we hold in our minds, and by no means with which no man is familiar. These magnets attract us to the forces, the people, the circumstances of life, which harmonize with the nature of our dominating thoughts. He also should have told us that before we can accumulate riches in great abundance, we must magnetize our minds with intense desire for riches, that we must become money conscious until the desire for money drives us to create definite plans for acquiring it. But being a poet and not a philosopher, Henley contented himself by stating a great truth in poetic form, leaving those who followed him to interpret the philosophical meaning of his lines. Little by little, the truth has unfolded itself until now. It appears certain that these principles described in this book hold the secret of mastery over our economic fate. Next, we have the principles that can change your destiny. We are now ready to examine the first of these principles and maintain a spirit of open-mindedness. And remember, as we read, they are the invention of not one man. The principles that have worked for many men, you can put them to work for your own enduring benefit. You will find it easy, not hard to do. Some years ago, I delivered the commencement address at Salem College, Salem, West Virginia. I emphasized the principle described in this next chapter with so much intensity that one of the members of the graduating class definitely appreciated it and made it a part of his own philosophy. The young man became a congressman and an important factor in Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration. He wrote me a letter in which he so clearly stated his opinion of the principle outlined in the next chapter that I've chosen to publish his letter as an introduction to that chapter. It gives you an idea of the rewards to come. So I'll read the letter to you quickly. My dear Napoleon, my service as a member of Congress have given me an insight into the problem of men and women. I'm ready to offer a suggestion which may become helpful to thousands of worthy people. In 1922, you delivered the commencement address at Salem College when I was a member of the graduating class. In that address, you planted in my mind an idea which has been responsible for the opportunity I now have to serve the people of my state and will be responsible in every way, a large measure for whatever success I may have in the future. I recall, as though it were yesterday, the marvelous description you gave of the methods by which Henry Ford, with very little schooling, without a dollar, with no influential friends, rose to great heights. I made up in my mind then, even before you had finished your book and speech, that I would make a place for myself, no matter how many difficulties I had to surmount. Thousands of young people will finish their schooling this year, and within the next few years, every one of them will be seeking just such a message of practical encouragement as the one I received from you. They will want to know where to turn to, what to do to get started in life. You can tell them because you have helped to solve the problems of so many, many people. There are thousands of people in America today who would like to know how they can convert ideas into money. People who must start at scratch without adequate finances and recoup their losses. If anyone can help them, you can. If you publish this book, I would like to own the first copy that comes from the press, personally autographed by you. With best wishes, believe me, cordially yours, Jennings Randolph. That's kind of interesting, and I lost track of the fact that this was someone else. This was a letter to Napoleon Hill from Jennings Randolph. I didn't make that clear earlier. I may want to re-record this, but for the time being, I want to acknowledge that. And finally, Napoleon Hill writes, 35 years after I made that speech, it was my pleasure to return to Salem College in 1957 and deliver the baccalaureate sermon. At that time, I received an honorary Doctor of Literature degree from Salem College. Since that time, in 1922, I have watched Jennings Randolph rise to become one of the nation's leading airline executive, a great inspirational speaker, and a United States Senator from West Virginia.